Okay, so the whole focus of this session is on how do we make a career in research more attractive to our best and brightest. I guess that's assuming we attract the best and brightest. Just out of interest, how many people in the room consider themselves health researchers? How many people in the room? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, quite a small number, really. And how many consider themselves early career health researchers? I'm definitely one of them. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so very small minority. So I think that's interesting in itself, in that we're talking about people who there aren't a huge amount of in the room. I suspect more of you might be categorised as early career health researchers than you might like. And we've one on the panel, I think. Is that right, Niamh? Are you the only one? So I'm going to start with Niamh Humphreys, who's actually technically entitled Senior Research Fellow in RCSI. And I think Niamh's in a really interesting position in that she's doing research on the health workforce, but is also a career researcher. And your research, Niamh, has got quite a lot of airing recently, where you talk about the importance of attraction, retention and motivation of the health workforce. I'm wondering, would you talk about that just briefly, and then its application to health researchers?
Yeah, no problem. I think it's important not to just look at attraction. I think that research is actually a really attractive career. I mean, I think those of us who work in research feel quite honoured to work in research. It's a privilege to work in research. The difficulty, I think, is in retaining people in research and in motivating them and supporting them to do the best research that they can. And there are parallels with the health workforce, with health professionals, doctors, nurses, midwives, and all the allied health professionals. So it's not just about attraction, it's about retaining the best staff in post once you have them in, and supporting them to do the best job that they can do. I think, yeah, that's how it relates.
And how that parallels with the health research workforce?
Well, I think in terms of, say, attracting researchers into health research, so in health services research, which is where I work, there's a huge number of people applying for PhD programs, for instance. There's a lot of competition to enter into the health workforce. There are still a good few people applying for postdocs, to transition from maybe PhD programs into postdoc posts, but the lack of a kind of career structure for them to work within makes it difficult for them to see how to move on past the PhD, the postdoc, where next for them. So I think that's a challenge for all of us, really, is to have a more structured career for researchers to fit within and to work within once they have the PhD and maybe the initial postdoc after PhD.
Okay, thanks, Niamh. I'm going to go to Doug. Doug Beaton is in knowledge management in the HSE, so he has the light weight on his shoulders of being responsible for 1.1% of the 13 billion budget, theoretically anyway, in terms of... Doug, you've spoken about the importance of joint posts across academia and the health service, but also that ring fencing or protecting time that Susan alluded to as being such a hard thing to do. Do you want to talk a bit more about that?
Yeah, and just to be clear, I mean, I'm working in a small team and we have a role in terms of engendering the use of research and data and knowledge in the HSE, but only a tiny part of the whole story.
How many are you?
14 altogether, of which one is a joint post with Trinity, for example. And we have someone on the team who's got a PhD and another one who's doing a PhD. I mean, certainly when I was preparing for today, talking to people, it's obvious that we should try as much as possible to have that concept of having protected time and having that link between academia and the system. As long as we can create the right circumstances where their knowledge and their expertise is very valued and is very instrumental to improvement and efficiency and effectiveness. I mean, and if there's time, I might get into some of those issues, but I'm sure other people will pick them up. In terms of creating that positive cycle of drawing on that knowledge and that becoming part of what the manager wants to see happen. So.
Okay, we'll keep it going. Dolores Conway is professor in Dolores Cahill in the Conway Institute. And Dolores, you've been on all these government bodies blamed or attributed to changing career structures for researchers in Ireland. Do you want to talk about some of that, reflecting on some of the input earlier?
I chaired the Advisory Science Council report towards a framework for researcher careers. And with the HERG, which was also around at the same time, we brought in the career structure of postdoc 1, 2, and then research fellow, senior research fellow. And just in response to the question this morning, after senior research fellow, at least in our proposal, is that the researchers then go on to be an associate professor or professor. So it's seen that all professors should do teaching and research and innovation or policy, so that it isn't a stop at the senior research fellow. It then goes on to professor, but that professors don't just do research or teaching. So the research structure is all the way up. But I suppose one of the things that we found was that, and I did establish the funding in UCD to set up a career development office, which is 4 people, that does career development and is engaged with people doing a PhD and postdocs, is to tell them that this is a very insecure career. Only, 10% may potentially get an academic post. But if they do, they will generally have to work outside of the university. They do their PhD and go internationally or work in industry and then come back. So that if that's what you want to do, essentially you're self-employed. So I just reiterate Janet's comments about getting rid of tenure, is that really we need to communicate to people PhD is a lot of competencies, a section of which are research, but that you have to be a self-starter. You have to think about innovation and policy and government bodies. And I have a company in Germany that employs 70 people that came directly from my first postdoc. So that's the kind of thing that you have to do. You're basically working for yourself. And this is not some career that you do a PhD and then you go on. So that I found, that is a hard message. And it was driven, I would say, by the Fixed Term Workers Act and the whole CID. And one of the things is we were asleep at the wheel, because the UK, will say, got a derogation from the Fixed Term Workers Act applied to researchers, and Ireland didn't. And Germany was involved in doing it, so that they don't consider if you do a postdoc in a university, you're the equivalent of somebody that has a permanent job. So it's easier to move around universities or stay within universities in other European countries than it is in Ireland, because the researchers weren't engaged with the policy framework when the Fixed Term Workers Act was being discussed.
Okay, Maria, who's beside you, Maria Ivancheva from the School of Justice in UCD. I think Maria would have very different opinions about tenure, so we might let Maria come in now.
Yeah, I disagree completely with this. Being an early career researcher, not in the health sciences, I think this is something dangerous that is happening. I think we should not look up to the UK for advice on where we should be heading next. I think, on the contrary, the UK sets a very dangerous pattern. I think in order for Ireland to develop a long-term research strategy, we need institutional memory, we need to attract researchers, and the only way to do that is to offer tenure. So not tenure track, but tenure, to offer kind of career stability. At present, 80% of our researchers, according to Andrew Loxley, are on fixed-term contracts. UCD recently set a pattern at the Labour Court by calling one postdoctoral fellow who has been with the institution for 6 years a student, postdoctoral student. That was how the lawyer called that person repeatedly in the trial to deny the MSCID. And so another thing that I want to say here is that there are a number of dangerous splits that have been happening, and we should stop them. First is the split between social sciences and natural sciences. There is this myth going on that people in the social sciences have less exit options, whereas in the natural sciences there is a brand new world out there that's waiting. But from interviews that I have done among academics for natural scientists, so people from the STEM sciences, it is equally difficult to stop in your mid-30s or further on in your life and start a whole new career from the scratch. Then you start competing with people who have opted out of academia early on, and you are a newbie within a field that has developed very rapidly while you have been a researcher. Secondly, there is a very big split between teaching and research, and I think it is very important to realize that while we're now speaking about research careers, most of the students in these countries are being taught by a growing number of overworked, underpaid, hourly paid, usually female working force. That is in a growingly precarious situation and are more, increasingly dependent on all sorts of social welfare, whereas the welfare state here is crumbling down. I think this is very important, especially for women. As we saw earlier in the presentation, women are those who are mostly leaving the working force, 59%, as far as I remember from the UK data. And this is important, especially in a country where 70% of permanent posts, according to the HEA, are given to men, and where there is no paternity leave. So we are left really in a very dangerous and very precarious situation.
Okay, I'm going to stop you there, Maria, and I'd love you to think about, for the next bit, some of the solutions to that, apart from 10 years old. But Robert, I'm going to come to you, and Robert O'Connor is Head of Research in the Cancer Society. And you've spoken, Robert, about you're interested in the idea of career resilience. So maybe you could talk about that for a bit.
Sure. I guess when I look at friends and colleagues and some of the people in the audience, maybe this will resonate with them as well. Most people go into a research career for higher gain. They don't really go in for money, although society might expect health researchers to be going around in Ferraris and Lamborghinis. They don't. And researchers realise that very early on, but they're typically in their late 20s into their early 30s, and they're looking and benchmarking themselves against others in other fields, and particularly lately IT fields and so on. And one needs resilience. One needs to be able to take the knocks that come along in one's life and one's job. But many researchers eventually leave because they get hit with so many knocks. So there'll be typically a financial knock. So we definitely need to look at the financing of a research career, so that researchers are not disenfranchised from things like mortgages and other normal things of evolution into full adulthood, that they're not rented nor renting. They can compete with their colleagues that they went to college with. Skill sets dealing with that, so building in aspects outside of the researcher training. Things like management training, recognizing the importance of managing your own time, you're managing your own health, the work-life balance. Those kind of skills are actually very important, and the most successful researchers tend to be reasonably good at that. Women, there's no question, are disenfranchised from the research environment, but actually parents are disenfranchised, and having children is a normal part of life. It's a normal part of a society. And researchers come to a stage sometimes where they're trying to balance up the fact that having a child, particularly as a woman, but also as a man, can have an impact. And it's not appropriate that our society disenfranchises people for having children. So we need to build into that model that appropriate supports, that it's just a normal part of life, that you have a child, you move on, there's resources there available to help. So resilience in those aspects. It's not about putting hundreds of thousands of euro on the plate and saying, if you're a researcher in cancer or diabetes or whatever, this will be the job for you. It's actually making sure that the role and the job is competitive with the other aspects of society, and then you get the great asset, or the great drive of contributing to the health of the nation and the community and so on.
Okay, I'm going to...
If just one last thing, we need to change the model, and I think particularly one of the speakers, actually all of the speakers kind of spoke about this. We're still using the same model of research being an academic undertaking. And we've got technical, we've got academic, and we've got admin staff in universities and so on. We need research staff. It actually needs to be recognised as a formal function of institutions that there is a research activity. So we need to break the mould a little bit and support that. And I think there is a move towards that from what I hear with institutions.
Okay, I'm going to go to Annalisa Monsanti, who's a program manager with the HRB, and in a way, the HRB is responsible for some of that mould forming or mould breaking. You're about to publish a new strategy, isn't that right? And you're directly responsible for career and skills development within... you will, but for the content of that within the health strategy. So the same way as Paul Finucane gave us a sneak preview of some of it, will you give us just a trailer perhaps, or a preview of the elements, relevant elements in the new strategy?
Yeah, so what we have been doing, of course, in the last few strategies to put quite a lot of emphasis on research careers. At different stages, we have probably emphasized more the early career or the late stage career. So what we will be trying to do is to continue, of course, the endeavor to train PhD students And to fill some of the gaps, of course, we have specific remits in which we fund. So PhD training will be continued, of course. We'll be probably specialized in some area, or we will continue to invest in medical doctor, healthcare professional, and clinicians in general. And what we, of course, have to what we have found, which is something Susan's talked about, there are difficulties in funding sometimes clinicians or healthcare worker because the salary scale, for example, or the research project time is an issue. And that's something we'll probably work with HSE and the Department of Health and some academic departments as well to continue on that. One other area we have identified as a gap is, of course, towards the leadership stage, which is basically the postdoc for life. And at a certain point, you have to step up and trying to identify the future leaders. So we will try to probably invest some funding on that area and then continue investing on senior leader, which is like Susan said, just enable them to lead, and that will be in a different remit. So we'll be continue with protect time, clinician science, and so on. So as in the slide that Paul has presented, that was given by Graham, and so we have 3 different pillars, and then research careers is mainly one enabler. We know that research careers are essential to basically provide good health research in Ireland. Do you want some more specifics, or?
Maybe we'll let people come back to you on it in the Q&A, because I am just trying to get through you all quickly. Last but not least is Muireann O'Connor. Muireann is the first ever head of research and development and health analytics at the Department of Health. He started his job yesterday, so we're all going to be really nice to him today and not give him too hard a time. But in your bio, the last line of your bio, Muireann, it says, in the immediate years ahead, you aim to transform the connectedness and the comprehensiveness of the evidence base underpinning health policy and practice. And I'd love to hear how you're going to do that, and what is the role of the health researcher within that?
Yeah, thanks very much. Yeah, it's a great pleasure to be here. It's the second day in the job, and it is indeed a very exciting new departure for the Department of Health to pitch research and development and health analytics at such a senior role. It's the first such role across the entire civil service. And I suppose a part of the job is to give some tangibility and concreteness to our commitment, oft reiterated, to evidence-based policy and to evidence-based health service delivery. I suppose the Department of Health will expect a immediate priority of mine to be that I chip in sort of supporting policy, performance evaluation, and new approaches to accountability for public investment and funding allocations. I suppose for the researcher, what I would hope the Department of Health and in partnership with its agencies will do is develop the database infrastructure underpinning health research in Ireland. I was delighted Susan mentioned this as an expectation of my role because it corresponded exactly with a major priority of mine. I think we need a very solid evidence-based focus on the population frame and the database infrastructure. I think I'm starting at a very interesting time. A lot of the unique health identifier, electronic health records, the legislation is passed, and a major part of the work will be to develop that. And I think that's really important for any of the research that goes on. So much of my area before this was education, and so much of the discourse in the social sciences is about whether the population in question represents the sample in question represents the population. And an awful lot of energy is expended on that, and then the results are kind of almost an afterthought. So I think if we can get the population frame right, and it'll take a lot of work, then we'll have a very clear idea of the extent to which each of the samples that we're interested in represent or are applicable to the broader population. So that'll be a major priority.
There's been a research data and innovation plan stuck in a pipeline in Hawkins House for quite a while. What's the time frame on that in terms of publication? Or
I thought you said you weren't going to ask me a difficult question.
Oh, this is me at my nicest.
it'll be like with me in post now. We'll be moving to develop a data strategy and innovation strategy with the health partners, with the Health Research Board, with the HSE, and I think actually the objective is to sort of embed research in clinical practice, in the delivery of healthcare. And actually, what we want to get to with ICT and behavioural change is the way that the administration of health and social care itself will generate the evidence base. Like I think it was made, Susan and others made the point that an awful lot of researchers' energy goes into collecting data, and it's really the analytics now where the value is. And I suppose we just need to get that infrastructure right. And I think Ireland, even though the data is in quite a messy state right now, I think we're the right size of a country, we have the right kind of attitude, we've good communication, we've good connectedness across government departments. I think we have an opportunity to really distinguish ourselves among other countries in terms of the connectedness of our evidence base. And, you know,
There's a benefit to starting late or something, is there?
well, there probably is. Yeah, technology can leapfrog a lot, but technology investment is only one part of it. It's culture change. I think that came up. It's education and training. It's research skills, and I'm not. The talk of a researcher career sits a little uncomfortably with me because I don't see how embeddedness is better achieved. I think when the research responsibilities for research are sort of universalized across anyone in the health and social care system, I would think has a responsibility to contribute to research. And I suppose the department's main task is to represent the public interest, and it's absolutely in the public interest and in every member of the public's interest that health service provision is evidence informed. So. Okay.
Thanks. Are there any, we're going to go to the tables, but are there any burning questions or comments from the floor they'd like to make to the panel before we lose them? Evelyn, there.
It's burning, it's burning.
Okay, go for it.
And I'm sorry, Maurice, you're on day 2, so I'll try and go easy. But I think the big elephant in the room is the fact that the HSE doesn't have a research budget at all. And that doesn't help when you're talking about, and I know Doug will probably nod his head frantically here in this, because that doesn't help when you're talking about health information and the connectivity between the information like on the HYPE system within hospitals and what our researchers are doing, whether that be in academic institutions or what we're doing in ICORG in clinical trials, or what's happening in the clinical research facilities which the HRB has funded. You know, and I think that's something the Department of Health is going to have to deal with. And it has to come, and I know that's very much the department is the policy arena, but they're going to have to deal with this, you know, and you know, it's unfair to say to us in the research community that everything to do with health research must be funded through the Health Research Board when all of our patients are under the HSE's watch. And how are we supposed to conduct research with those patients if we don't have connectivity between the two? And to be honest, enough is enough, and the gloves are off, you know, because you know we're missing a trick here, and what we're all about is about making our people, our patients, well. And in cancer, they could be doing a lot better in Ireland, and that's an area we're going to focus on.
Okay, thanks, Evelyn. Are there any other burning questions from the floor? Doug, do you want to respond in relation to the HSE?
Can I just say one quick thing? Germany, the healthcare sector and the research sector, they're putting in 4 billion just to do data integration between the hospitals, the research institutes, and clinical trial and the pharmaceutical industry. And it's a real tedious process where they're actually looking at data formats and clinical registries. And I'm on their review, and I think it'll be 2 years in February. But they've already done this in Canada, where they put the research into the hospitals, and they actually saved double the money that they put into the research centres by diagnosing the patients and actually doing personalised medicine, so they got the right drug, or they collated the data with response. So they've actually saved the healthcare sector twice as much money, and they invested about 100 million in 9 research centres in Genome Canada, and Pierre Mullian set that up, who was involved in setting up MMI. So it isn't just that, you know, the HSE should think, oh, we give money to research, it's going to cost us money. It actually is all about really using the data. And the last thing I'll say is the GPs as well around the country are crying out that they can actually contribute their patient data. And the whole issue around sending data and collating data is that we really need to get some kind of format to not just engage with researchers and universities, but to engage around prescription of drugs as well and antidepressants. There's a huge amount of money been wasted. So, you know, it's not that research will cost money, it could actually save significant amounts of money.
Okay, thanks, Dolores. Just Doug, the status or not of health research strategy in the HSE?
Okay, and thanks for the opportunity to respond. As I've emphasised already, I work at one part of the HSE, but it is true that I can only agree with your passion and the point you're making. There has been plans along the road to certainly have a very senior person within the Health and Wellbeing Division, for example, really kind of leading on a part of the agenda. But in fact, that's now morphing really into the HSE looking to appoint a person across the whole organisation to establish a research and development office, and that's a definite plan that is going to happen. I don't know exactly when and exactly what shape or form it's going to take, but I'm told that that is on the cards. So I think you should be hopeful. But I suppose, without me reading out all of their jobs and responsibilities, certainly one of them is to coordinate and make best use of monies that is already been spent, in fact, by the HSE in relation to research in various ways. I won't enumerate them all. I think just when I have the microphone, the other thing I wanted to just add to the discussion, for me, and I was actually very heartened to hear the initial speaker's comments, because when I looked at the brief for this some weeks ago, or months ago, I should say, in terms of being a member of the steering group, the first thing that struck me was we have a market failure here. And that point seems to come out over and over again. And to be slightly personal about it, I moved country 3 times during the 1990s. I didn't have a permanent contract for 10 years. You have to take risks, and you have to be in the rock, and you have to be prepared to get bruised. And the other thing I'd say is that that's all part of an agenda, in my mind, around using a market mechanism within health service, which absolutely turns the gas up full on for why you want research skills in your building, helping you be more effective. So there are some issues there to be dealt with, but certainly a leadership role within HSE is part of the answer, but it's not the whole answer at all.
I agree with your point. I'm confident that the commitment to research and evidence-based policy and practice demonstrated by the department in my appointment will be followed up by an infusion of support for research across the service. I read in Connor's briefing paper of a 1% set aside for research in the UK system. That's the kind of thing we need, just to embed that research in practice and to ensure it's delivered.
Okay. And Maria, you want to come in?
I'm not sure if I understood you correctly, but I think we're speaking here of mostly public sector institutions. I don't know why they should be responsible to business and why they should be responsible to the market. I don't see why we should be taking risks within our careers, and especially given that to take risks, you are starting at very different points. It's one thing to take risks when you're an individual without any caring commitments, and a very different thing to move families across countries with yourself, which makes, especially as Robert mentioned, parents at a very big disadvantage. And even if it might not be their career that's affected, it's often early childhood development that is affected. And we really have to take this into account, especially when we're speaking about this hypermobility that the European Union has been promoting through the Marie Curie, especially framework, which for many years required you to move countries in order to get research funding. And now it's trying to do reintegration, but again, it doesn't offer permanency, it just offers short-term contracts. So I think we have to be very serious about this. We're not agents of profit, we're agents of social change, if you want. We're agents of care, like especially in the medical profession. So thinking of ourselves as some clogs within a huge mechanism that delivers profit to the business is really off the mark.
Okay, thanks, Maria. Lisa, and then we're going to the
Can
table.
I just respond quickly? I think I get your point, but the research career is quite different than any other careers. I've been in research for 13 years. I changed career. You can do any time. You just reinvent yourself. You just have to recreate. You have to acknowledge your skills and apply them. So I don't think it's too late. It's never too late. like you said before, you can't change career late in life. And that when I think we talk about mobility, mobility before was used mainly about physical mobility. Nowadays it could be a different type of mobility. It's called intersector mobility, it's called collaboration, networking. Is not just physical mobility. And very often we talk about mobility, maybe physical is more about early career. And it's not necessary probably to go abroad, but maybe if you stay in your department for 15 years of your research, you maybe have a different type of maybe training that you would have if you go to a center of excellence abroad and come back. So I think it's not a static career, research. It depends on the discipline, it depends on the area you work on. And nowadays, research, and that's an emphasis is put at Horizon 2020 in Europe, is multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, it's intersectoral, and that's part of the hard part of the training, I think, PhD student and postdoc have to face, because the skills are quite different than just doing biomedical research or another type of research.
Okay, I'm going to stop the panel there. As you can see, we've great consensus on our panel, and I'm hoping for equal amounts of dissent at the tables, right? So over to you, because you've been doing a lot of listening. Kind of wait till after your table session? Do you mind? Because I think, yeah, okay, great. I'll come to you as the first cue after the, so quick brief introductions, and I just want you focused on the question that's up there. And we have Grace and Gillian who are going to sort of, we're not going to do table feedback because that's akin to torture as far as I'm concerned, who are going to get the essence of a few points from the tables. So over to you for about 20 minutes for discussion of the question on hand, and then we'll come back for both a sense of what's been said at the tables, but also you can put more questions or comments from the floor to the panel, but in a more interactive way. Okay? Get talking.